Olene, and salutations once again to the Truth Core, whoever and wherever you may be on the planet. I'm here today, July 4th, 2021, with the third installment of my public sanity alert. And the title of this talk is Ultimate Victory over the Coviet Regime. To begin, I'd like to respond briefly to a comment that appeared recently somewhere in my channels. The two issues raised were, one, that I do not know it all, and two, that some of my entourage, namely Ginny, regard me as a messiah. Bear with me for a moment while I clarify where I stand on those two issues. In doing so, I will set the tone for the rest of this message. In the first place, I don't know anywhere where I have ever claimed that I know it all. I certainly don't know it all. There are many things I don't know, and many subjects I don't know about. What I do claim is that I know better regarding the subjects that are specific and unique to me. I do claim that. So that is obviously the assertion of a Gnostic smartass, a Gnostic know-it-all. But the magnitude of my self-importance is not so great that I would ever consider for a moment that I know it all or would ever present myself to you in that way. What I do know, however, stands on a unique foundation, which I call the living Gnosis today, based upon the ancient Gnosis of the pagan mysteries. And as far as I can tell, well, I'm not the only individual in the world who is communicating that knowledge in its current updated form. I am not by any means the only individual who is living it, who knows it by heart, practicing it every day in their lives and communicating it to others. Not at all. There are many others who do that, the Shaktas in Planetary Tantra. It so happens, however, that I am, so far as I know, the only one doing that openly in open source discourse on the internet. Personally, I don't need recognition from anyone. But transpersonally, the recognition that goes to me goes to that unique and original source of knowledge. You see that? And when you, who care and dare to listen to what I say, know that, when you keep that in the forefront of your mind, it focuses your mind to receive the optimal benefit from what I say. I'm not a messiah. It's laughable to even consider that. I assure you that those who are close to me, as friends and allies, would find that claim ridiculous, and they never, ever regard me, even remotely, in that way. They do recognize that I am a teacher, and that, in some sense, I could be said to hold the role of the world teacher. Why? Simply because I teach the world. It's as simple as that. The knowledge that I have, the insight, and the perspective, such as it is, goes out to the entire world to reach anyone who's disposed to receive it. So those who listen to me could be called students of the world teacher. That term, world teacher, is of course a trope that derives originally from theosophy and from the Krishnamurti episode of second-generation theosophists. And there is an allusion from the world teacher to the figure of the Maitreya. But I've explained what the Maitreya is. It's a process, not a person. So anyone, could be any of you, who engages that process, who demonstrates it in your words and actions, is the Maitreya as well. I speak to you in the spirit of the Maitreya, in the friendship of strangers. All right, enough of that jibber-jabber. Now, to get to the heart of what I want to say, I ask you to recall a quotation from Dostoevsky that I've cited in a couple of places. It comes from the brothers Karamazov, and it goes like this. Quote, "The awful thing is that beauty is mysterious as well as terrible. God and the devil are fighting there, and the battlefield is the heart of man." End quote. It might be better to say, and there are various translations of this famous line, God and the devil, or Satan, are fighting for the world, and the battlefield is the human soul. I think that says it better. So, as I've said before, Dostoevsky, great as he was as a seer who looked into the depths of the human condition, suffered from a Christocentric bias. And what he said is entirely wrong. In order to be in a battle and to win, one of the first things you need to know are the terms of engagement. And that quotation does not state the terms of engagement correctly. Anyone who takes a stand in the battle that is currently waging and reaching its culmination upon this planet on those terms will not achieve victory. Humanity, the soul of the human animal, is not in the middle. It's not the middle term in the terms of engagement. So, what then is the correct or corrected description? The enemy stands in the middle, not humanity. And the enemy stands between humanity on the one hand, on the one side, and the Aeon Sophia, your divine mother, on the other side. Those are the actual terms of engagement which can lead to victory over the enemy, the psychopaths, the Xenosh, the archons, the authorities. Now, to apply military terminology, the language of military tactics, you can say that the enemies of life, the psychopaths who have gained extraordinary control over the social order in all of its aspects, are caught in a pincer movement. Sophia is closing in on them on one side, from one side of the battle line, and humanity, or certain self-selected members of the human species from all the races, are closing in on them from the other side. Now, if you hold this description steady in your minds and you reflect on it closely, you'll see that it begs a question. I can assure you that this question is paramount among the Shaktas, and it is a subject of deep and continuous discussion. Also, this question has been raised by certain comments that have appeared on my channels over the years. To put it crudely, why doesn't she do something about this terrible situation? The greatest crime against humanity is in progress. She is the mother of the human species, of all the races. Why doesn't she intervene? Why doesn't she do something about it? There are two ways of responding to this question, a long answer and a short answer. Now, the long answer, to which I'll refer later on in this talk, requires that you know her story, the home story, the fallen goddess scenario. When you learn this story and come to love it and know it by heart, you have not only an extraordinary empathy for your Divine Mother, but you also have Gnostic insight into why she does not intervene in the way that one might want her to do. But at the same time, you learn the conditions in which she can intervene. And all of that is specific intel, specific to the living Gnosis today. It doesn't come from any other source. So learning the narrative and everything that happened to her preceding the moment when she turned into the earth, before humanity appeared, plays forward today into the circumstances of her intervention, such as it is. The short answer is that she is doing something about it. But what she does about it depends on a reciprocal action from her species, or more exactly, from those members of humanity who recognize her and who voluntarily commit themselves to being her allies in what is called the great event of correction, Sophia's correction. When we discuss this topic, and it's one of the top 5 on discussion or under discussion on Nematta, we use a formula to clarify the situation. It's a dyadic formula, and it's really simple. Correction and resolution. So picture again the terms of engagement. On the one side of the battle line, Sophia implements her correction, and on the other side, her allies implement their resolution. They do what only they can do within the conditions of the social order and according to the circumstances of the human condition. That is the responsibility of the agents of resolution. And resolution reciprocates to her correction, which is largely a planetary superhuman event. That being so, another way I could state the short answer goes like this. It's not Sophia's responsibility to intervene and save us from this crime against humanity in progress, due to the fact that she did not allow it to happen. It is those living today and in previous generations, going back about 250 years, who allowed it to happen. And yes, that does include you and I living today. The responsibility for facing this vile, hateful attack upon humanity unfolding around the world today in countless scenes and situations goes to those who allowed it to happen, not to her. And so only they who allowed it to happen can do anything about it, can resolve the situation. It follows from that those who do commit themselves to resolution have to really know what's going on. They have to be informed about the causes of the program of transhumanism and the Great Reset. And they have to know the factors that come into play by which they, including you and I, allowed this to happen. That's our responsibility, not hers. Now, it is a very great fact that countless numbers of decent, well-meaning, and conscientious people in the world today are engaged in the battle. And it's a life or death battle, and they know it. And they are doing whatever they can to oppose and overthrow the Coviet regime. Nevertheless, it is imperative to realize that ultimate victory depends upon a factor within that movement of opposition. Many of those who are committed to that, committed to the defeat of the archons in the consummation of their works, as the Gnostics called it, don't know anything about the Gnostic intel or the Sophianic narrative of the Aeons of Fire. That does not in any way discount or discredit the efforts they're making, and I'm sure those efforts will produce the changes that are needed to overthrow the Coviet regime. Nevertheless, the ultimate victory depends on a special factor in the movement of opposition. That is the factor that I represent. Once again, to use military jargon, you could say that within that movement of opposition, there is something like the Marines. There is an elite warrior class, and that warrior class must be present. They are the tip of the arrow of Sophia's intention. And in the beauty to come, they will recognize each other, and they will be, in the future, that group of people who carry her intention for resolution, you see. And they will stand as distinct among all the others who are engaged in winning this battle. So let it be clear in the takeaway from this talk that the elite Gnostic force, the truth core, the ground force, the warrior class, are essential to the ultimate victory. With that assertion, I can direct your attention to a factor in the Sophianic narrative which illustrates the anomaly or the particular exceptional character of the battle currently facing the human races. The narrative teaches that the archontic assault against humanity was not anticipated when the human species was designed in the pleromic core. This is a clear and precise plot factor in the home story, and you would do well to learn about it. As the story goes, the star goddess from the galactic core, Sophia, with her consort, Thelete, designed the human genome in quite specific terms. And when they did so, they did not anticipate that the archons would be a real and present danger to the divine experiment on Earth that would eventually unfold when the genome was propagated in a planetary laboratory in the galactic limbs. How so? Well, the story says that it was the impact of the Aeon Sophia herself when she plunged out of the galactic core laterally across the limbs that produced the archons. So one of the lessons in the narrative is a hard pill for many people to swallow. You could call this the Gnostic red pill. Be assured there are many who would object to what I'm going to say now and who would not believe it and not accept it. Why not? Well, the conventional notion of God or gods or goddesses or divine beings does not include the possibility that they could cause unanticipated and unwanted effects in the cosmic order. The famous line from the Gospel of Philip says, "The world system as you know it came about due to an anomaly." The word for anomaly can also be translated as a transgression. So yes, indeed, the Aeon Sophia transgressed the cosmic order in a certain way when she departed from the galactic core. The result of that is what the Gnostics called the generation of the archons. This event is explained in depth and detailed in the Sophianic narrative. So before Sophia knew that the archons would be present due to her own activity, due to an unanticipated side effect of her plunge, she had designed the human genome in such a way that it was not prepared to handle the assault of the archons. So the story says, yes, Sophia, your divine mother, is responsible for the presence of the archons, those predatory parasites who interfere in this experiment that you are living right now on the planet Earth, which is her dreaming body. I assure you that I know better than anyone else, if you'll excuse my arrogance, that is a hard truth to accept. But I also know, and many others do as well, that once you accept it, it changes everything in your psyche, in your view of life, in your view of the human condition, the issues of responsibility and conscience. It changes everything in the way that you see the ultimate situation of the human species on this planet, and it changes it for the better. How can that be so? Well, the narrative continues, and the narrative explains the measures that Sophia is taking to compensate for this extraordinary situation. And when you know these measures by heart, you acquire the power that comes from knowledge. Have you heard it said that knowledge is power? Well, it may or may not be. You can have knowledge of certain situations and be powerless against them. But in the ultimate sense, and I am speaking to you here in the ultimate sense, the Gnostic knowledge of the human situation is a power like any other, and it becomes your power when you master that knowledge. If you're listening closely, you'll know that I just said that measures are underway to compensate for this extraordinary situation in which the races of the earth are faced with an extra-human alien predator that they were not originally designed to handle. What are these measures? Here again, the narrative is the guiding paradigm. Stay in the narrative. It tells you everything you need to know to face this battle in victory. The narrative says that the Aeon Sophia, being completely mindful of the fact that she introduced the archontic enemy into this experiment, is also mindful of how to compensate for that event. And the Divine Mother is doing so as I speak. So what is she doing? Well, she is making an exception to Aeonic protocols. Now, there are Aeonic protocols, and this is nothing mysterious. It's not metaphysical. You can understand what they are by comparison to the protocols for a scientific experiment. The Aeons are artists. They're cosmic designers, and they proceed along certain lines. They have certain rules of procedure, which can be understood by the human mind by comparison to the requirements for any scientific experiment. And these requirements are two. First, there must be a control group for the experiment. Otherwise, there is no way to assess its success. And second, the Aeons observe the protocol of non-interference. So if you were to set up an experiment with some forms of animal life in a large terrarium, think of the Eden Project in Cornwall in the UK, and if you were to set up within a sealed, hermetically sealed dome or hermetic vessel, which is what the atmosphere of the Earth is, then you would introduce into the experiment certain species of plants, including fungi, and you would include certain animals, and there would be conditions of the atmosphere favorable to the development of these species. Water, the presence of atmospheric gases in a certain balance, all of this is provided in the envelope of the planetary laboratory where you live. But the Aeonic protocol says that once such an experiment is underway on a planet in the galactic arms, the Aeons do not interfere. They don't intervene in what's happening in the terrarium, obviously, so that they can see how it develops on its own terms. They don't meddle with the experiment once it is underway. But what they do is monitor the experiment on a time-factored basis. And the key period, the key interval in monitoring this experiment here on Earth now is one precessional day of 25,920 years. So just imagine a group of scientists who've set up an experiment in a terrarium. They let it unfold on its own terms, but then at predetermined moments in time, they assess the results of the experiment and they recalculate the experiment dependent on the results they've achieved in one aeonic day. And this is exactly what's happening now. A good analogy to this process can be seen in the experiments of the Russian monk Mendeleev. His experiments with peas in the 19th century, I believe, established the basis for genetic science and even genomic sequencing to this day. Experiments with peas. And when he conducted these experiments, he did exactly as all scientists must do. He followed the protocol of allowing the peas to grow for a determined period of time, whether it be 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months. And every time the experiment reached the limit of that interval, then he recalibrated the experiment for the next phase of its development. And the reason why he did that, which is exactly the same reason for these aeonic protocols, is simple. The scientist must assess how an experiment develops on its own terms for a predetermined period of time, and then based on those results, recalibrate it. You can call it gain of function. In this way, the experiment gains function periodically as measured by these intervals. However, there is an exception underway in this experiment. You see, due to the fact that the Aeon Sophia who designed you is actually present now in the laboratory setting of the experiment, immediately present to you at all times, she is within the terrarium. She is the terrarium. She is like a scientist in the Eden Project who goes into the hermetically sealed dome with a specific intention to modify the conditions of the experiment. According to Aeonic protocols, that's not done. But the Aeon Sophia makes an exception. And in the language of the Sophianic narrative, this is called the mutation of A11. Now, as it stands in the time frame of this experiment, we are close to the end of one Kalpic day, one Aeonic day, of 25,920 years. We're about 200 years from the end of that day, which reduces to about 10 or 11 minutes by analogy to an average human day. Consistent with Aeonic protocols, neither Sophia nor any other Aeon would assess and recalibrate the experiment until 2216 AD, when this Aeonic day reaches the midnight hour and another day begins. But Sophia makes the exception to assess and recalibrate what's happening before that final moment. The way she does so is truly a divinely mysterious event. But it is not beyond the reach of human conception and human participation if you have the Gnostic intel. You can actually participate consciously in this event, the mutation of A11. What is A11? It's Anthropos 11. What is A10? A10 is the condition of the human species in this experiment previous to the mutation that she now introduces. This is a genetic mutation. It is her intention to genetically mutate human species from A10 to A11, to introduce a new strain of the species before the terminal moment at the end of the Kalpa, 2216. This is exactly what she's doing, and only Gnostic intel can inform you about it. Now, there's a lot more that could be said about how the Aeon Sophia is mutating the human species, including you and I, and how you can know about it and play along with it consciously, enjoy it, and benefit from it. But that discussion gets technical, and I reserve that type of discussion to those in Nematta, not simply to deprive anyone else of it, but due to the fact that it's a technical discussion and needs to be carried on by those who know the technicalities. Otherwise, it's just information that you can't process competently. However, I will indicate one way in which she's doing this. She does it through changes in the Earth itself, in the body of the planet, the oceans, the tides, and the atmosphere, in particular in the atmosphere. You see, by changing the balance of gases in the atmosphere, oxygen, nitrogen, carbon dioxide, argon, which, by the way, is more preponderant in the atmosphere than carbon dioxide, she recalibrates the mix of the biosphere, the atmospheric envelope. Like an alchemist, like a chemist, she changes the medium of human existence and human evolution, and indeed of all life, and she changes it in the way that is favorable to the mutation of A11 and many other things as well, many other radical changes in the way that the biosphere functions. She's doing this now, and doing it in force since the completion of her reset in March of 2014. One of the ways she's doing this is through the high incidence of volcanic activity. One effect of volcanic activity is that it introduces a lot of sulfur into the air. Why does she want to put more sulfur into the air? Well, there is a mysterious relationship between the chemical of sulfur and the mutability of DNA. So by saturating the atmosphere with sulfur, she favors the mutation to A11. And you can look really, really deeply into how she does that. This is not a proposition that I'm stating for belief, but it is something that can be investigated and verified. Nucleic acid can be modified in certain ways through the introduction of sulfur. Now, I presume, if I may so presume, that you will accept that I cannot elaborate further in this talk on those technicalities. So I'm going to shift the takeaway in the direction of two imperative points. Once again, I repeat the truism, knowledge is power. Well, if that is so, the knowledge that I'm imparting now is central to your power as an individual in reaching ultimate victory over the Coviet system. The first point is that the archons and their proxies and representatives in the world today, including both the racial Xenosh and the non-racial, and all the dupes who play along with them, cannot originate anything. There is a good case that can be made, and many of the Shaktas in Nemato will laugh about this when they hear it, to show that, in fact, many of the measures of oppression and manipulation and deceit employed by the archons are actually copied from Gnostic intel. They can't originate. So, for instance, for 3 years between March 2011 and March 2014, I presented the Gaian navigation experiment, and the leading theme of that event was reset, the reset of Sophia's correction. So then what happens 6 or 7 years later? The authorities come along with their version called the Great Reset. They can only imitate the truth, but they imitate it in such a way as to turn it around into a lie. That is called anti-mimon, the counterfeiting spirit of the archons, better said, the counterfeiting tactic. So the Great Reset today, which is the central manifesto of the Coviet regime, is a copy, a ripoff, and a perversion of Sophia's reset. Can I prove that? Well, one of the leading statements in the Great Reset goes like this: it will change what it means to be human. They actually say that in those exact words. But the mutation to A11 is actually what will change what it means to be human. Can you see that? The Archonic program, which is currently being implemented through the weapon of the mRNA injection, is nothing but a distorted mirror of the truth. And it's the truth that sets you free. When you know it, then you see clearly what is happening in the distorted mirror. And you see at the same time your responsibility and the source of your empowerment for ultimate victory. My second point then, my final point, which may well be the talking point of anything that I put on these channels in the future, goes to this simple assertion. In order to reach the beauty to come, there has to be a radical change in human nature. There has to be an upgrade of the species. So those who carry through this battle to its ultimate victory will be and are already becoming mutated human animals. But this is a mutation for the higher purpose of the human species and for the reclamation of its original purpose in this divine experiment. When you look at the current weapon being deployed around the world by the Coviet regime, you see a meme, you see a code, small m, RNA. What is RNA? Well, it is the messenger component of your genomic makeup that rewrites DNA. This is epigenesis. The Aeon Sophia is inducing a massive and exceptional event of epigenesis. So once again, the mRNA injection is simply a distorted, deceitful, and destructive archontic reflection of the true mRNA, the mother-directed epigenetic mutation, mRNA, the maternal RNA. She commands the maternal RNA. She designed the genome of the human species. Don't you think that she can modify it and mutate it at her immediate command as a divine designing goddess? She can. But knowing how she can is not a matter of belief. In fact, it can't be believed. It's unbelievable and doesn't need to be believed. What you need to do is know it, and be part of it. As for A10, well, A10 comprises a large component of human animals living on the earth today. And what happens to A10 as Sophia implements the mutation to A11 is something called apoptosis, the shedding of dead cells. Isn't that obvious? Enough said, and I'll be seeing you in the beauty to to come.